My name is Ruth Kikin-Gil. I'm a designer at Microsoft, and I lead responsible AI practices in an organization called Security Compliance and Management. And it's an organization that has roughly 3,000 people across the globe. Now I want you to meet Professor John McCarthy. He was one of the forefathers of AI. He was the one that coined the term artificial intelligence in 1956. And when he talked about the domain, he said, it's the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. And ever since, we are all chasing a vision of this super intelligent being that a human has created, and it's so intelligent, it's so amazing that it really just took over the world, it took over us and obliterated humanity. But, if we're looking at AI today, it's really more like a stage name for a group of technologies that each one of them are one-dimensional and can do one thing well. But each one of them has only one context. They can't really jump to other contexts. And when we're talking about AI products, it's not just one model or one algorithm that does everything. It's a sequence of different models, different algorithms. Each one of them is doing one thing and taking the outcomes of this one thing and moving it on to the next one. And there is a human behind all of that that is orchestrating the entire business, right? And telling it, okay, this is the end result. This is your context. This is what the final outcome should be. And the AI market share is rapidly growing. We all know that from a market share of $20 billion in 2018, the prediction is that it's going to go up into $200 billion by 2026, which is less than 5 years from now. So you can say that even if you're not working on AI product right now, you probably will do that in the near future. And the AI market is like a candy store. It's a variety of shapes and flavors, and everything looks so yummy. But if you don't pay attention to how much you consume and what's in your candy, well, you end up with rotten teeth. Or in our product design metaphor world, bad products that could cause harm. And we all eat candy, right? We don't stop, but we mitigate. We brush our teeth, we go to the dentist, we take care of eating healthier candy maybe. And the question is, what does responsibility, does being responsible look like in our product world? The common discourse about AI is that it's a hard technical problem. But you know what? The truth is that it's also a hard human problem because it touches everyone in our society. You, me, all of us. And what will take us, to start looking at AI and AI products from a human-centric perspective and really focus on what does that product is doing for us in our society, in the AI system. And AI challenges many things that are core to our safety, to our freedom, both as humans and as the entire society. It cannot exist without huge amounts of data. That's, the blood in its virtual veins. And we are all suppliers of that data, whether we want it or not. We are at risk because of that, of losing our privacy. We are compromising our security with all this data, our data, being out there. And if the data is collected in the wrong way, or if it's treated, or if it's unbalanced, we may be excluded, or we may be treated unfairly because all of that. And there are many stories how things could go bad, right? From Cambridge Analytica to the racist soap dispenser to classifying people as animals. We've all been there. We've heard those stories. And responsible AI, designing things responsibly, it's already a concern. Nearly 9 in 10 organizations across countries have encountered ethical issues resulting from the use of AI. 9 in 10. And on the other hand, if a user is using an AI product and they perceive the interaction as being ethical, the picture totally changes, right? They trust the brand more, they trust the product more, and the NPS goes up the roof, right? There's a huge gap there. Melvin Kranzberg said, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. Think about it. It means that we need to work from principles. It means that we need to think really, really well about what we're doing, because responsible AI is really about putting principles into action. And Microsoft has developed a set of principles: privacy and security, fairness, transparency, accountability, inclusion, so important, reliability. Other companies have developed very similar sets of principles of their own. And this is the core way on which we think about AI and how to develop AI products. And when we're thinking about what are the pillars of responsible AI, we talked about principles, we talked about being human-centered, but there's also collaboration between people from different disciplines. It's about being proactive, not waiting until something bad happens, but really going and scrutinizing your product and making sure that you are not causing any harm, or that you're mitigating harms that could possibly happen. And then it's contextual. And this is also super important. It's all about the context. The technology in itself can be used in many different scenarios, right? So if I'm trying to log in into my computer with facial recognition technology, this is fine. But if I'm using the same technology to look at people in demonstrations and single out some of them in order to throw them to jail, for example, not so good, right? So always think about your context, about the scenarios. And remember, responsible AI is not just about data science. It's really about all disciplines together, working together. It's not that the data scientists can or should fix everything. Many times they can't. The technology sometimes is not there yet. But there are many things that we can do in other parts of the process. And when people that are coming from different disciplines, are coming with different perspectives, they can help both figure out, what are the risks and the harms that this product already has, and also what are different ways that could be mitigating this product or the harms that this product could potentially bring to the world. So this collaboration is really important. And like I said, it's not a once and done. It's something that we need to do that all across the product lifecycle. And different parts of this product lifecycle have different solutions, different tools. And today I'm going to focus on one of them, which is the Human AI Design Guidelines. And it all started with a group of people, designers, researchers, user researchers from across Microsoft. And we came together and we said, okay, how can we make this connection between high-level principles over here and everyday work over there? And from this investigation came the Human AI Design Guidelines. And you may ask, fairly, we have dozens of years of user experience research and UI research, why do we need to have another set of guidelines? What's different about AI? So let's try to unpack some of these challenges. Well, number one, AI is probabilistic and it's prone to errors. And this is really important. You can think about it like weather report. Okay, in Seattle, I'm from Seattle. 2 years ago, there was a weather forecast that we're going to have this huge snowstorm that is going to bury Seattle under it. Everyone panicked. There was no food in the grocery stores, and everybody waited for what we call the snowpocalypse. But snow did come down for like 2 days, and then it melted, and that was it. We all survived. It was good. It was okay. And you can think about weather forecast as a metaphor for AI systems. It looks scientific, which it is, and therefore reliable, which is not quite. And we need to design for this tension. We need to convey that the predictions, that whatever they are not 100% certain, that there's room for mistakes in there. And today, both AI systems and weather forecasts usually fail to do that. Too much authority. Number two, AI learns and changes over time. And this is great, right? This is the real promise of AI. You put something out there, and then it grows, it learns, it changes, and you don't have to do anything. Well, sometimes it's great, sometimes not so great. Like in this case, where a journalist got pregnant. She was excited about it, started posting all kinds of things on social media, and started seeing all these ads about pregnancy and about baby products. And then she lost her baby. She had a miscarriage. And she didn't want to see these ads anymore. That was too much, right? So she told the site, I don't want to see your ads about pregnancy. And then the site thought, oh, okay, well, she must have had a baby. Let's bring on all the baby products ads that we have. And that made everything even worse. So what I want you to take away from it is that you can't just put something out there. You can't put the algorithm out there and not monitor it, or not make sure that it is behaving the way that you wanted it to behave. Like kids, they need constant attention. And number three, AI can violate established principles of traditional UI design. And this is really interesting because, like I said, there are dozens of years of experience around UI and UI design and UX design. And there are all kinds of heuristic systems that are kind of Bibles for how to design great products. But, for example, one of the principles that is being violated here is the consistency principle. And this is something that seems just intuitive, right? If things behave the same, they should look the same, they should be as familiar as possible, right? And have the same location every time on your page. That's good design. But you can't do that when the promise is to change. So take search, for example, right? In search, let's say I type something in there, then the search engine is looking at my search history, and then it comes up with a different search history queries that I had, and then it creates suggestions, which are personalized to me, and then it ranks the results in a certain way. But if someone else is doing the exact same thing but has different search history, they will see something different, right? Different suggestions and different ranking of results. So if in this example, I'm looking for Titanic, right? And you can see how the movie is way down there. And then I'm looking for Kate Winslet, who is the lead actress in that movie. And then I go back and I look for Titanic. And you can see how the search results have surfaced on the top, right? And this is by design, this is on purpose. The other thing is about error prevention principle. And it's good, right? Like we don't want errors, but with AI systems, they're unavoidable. They're just part of the system. Sometimes they're funny, autocorrect makes me say things I didn't intend to, haha. But sometimes not so much. For example, in this case, researchers created an adversarial attack on computer vision algorithms that are used in many self-driving cars. And what you can see here are that there's very innocent stickers that you can see on the stop sign. What they actually fool the system to see is that the speed limit is of 45 miles per hour. And this is something completely different. But the good news is that issues that are caused by AI frequently can or don't need to be resolved only by the model. They can be resolved and mitigated with good design. And with all of these things in mind, we set to create guidelines that will help designers and product makers create products that are not only useful and usable and desirable, but also responsible. What are the guidelines, you're asking? You talk so much, but show me what they really are. The guidelines are based on 30 years of research, both in academia and in the industry, and taking all kinds of different heuristics, best practices, guidelines, and put them together into a set of 18 guidelines. And they are divided into 4 groups. And each group is most important for one part of this relationship between a person, a user, and the AI system. So what happens initially, what happens during interaction, when the system is wrong, it's always wrong, right? And what happens over time. And you can read about the process in our Kai paper, but what I really want you to think about, and this is why I'm talking about that today, is that after we released the guidelines, we said, okay, but do they actually work? Why are they important? And so there was a follow-up research done. And from that research, what we learned was that whenever the guidelines were apparent in the user experience, whenever the experience was aligned with those guidelines, people tended to trust that product more. They felt more in control. They felt more productive. So if you're interested in any of that, pay attention. Now let's look at some examples. The first is what happens initially. So this one is making clear how well the system can do what it can do. And this is really about setting expectations and not appearing as too smart for the user, right? On the left, you can see Facebook using very humble language, saying, well, these are people you may know, because they're not sure if I know them or not. There are all these signals, but who knows? On the second, on the right, you can see Zoe, which is a social bot. And Zoe is making typos on purpose. Why? Because its creators knew that it will make mistakes. So let's prime the user to the fact that the system is not perfect, that it can make mistakes. And then what happens during interaction? In this case, timing services based on context. Important. I listen to Spotify. Skipped some songs, and then something popped up and say, well, instead of skipping all the time, why don't you just edit this playlist, right? Makes sense. Matching relevant social norms. This is important, right? I tried to set up a meeting with Sarah, and I did it at 9:30 p.m. by mistake. So Outlook is asking me, hey, this is outside both your working hours, Sarah's working hours. Is that what you really want to do? Or another example, this is the notorious CEO query. And up until some time ago, when you clicked CEO and you typed CEO, you would get mainly um, white men, middle-aged. And if you wanted to see something else, you could go to the subqueries, look for black CEO, women CEO, etc. And then the Bing team rethought everything. The designers, user researchers, data scientists work together to figure out, is that the right thing to show? Because the reason why we're seeing all these people, these white men, is because of interaction bias. The more the data, the results are based on existing data, right? And the more you click on things, the more you see of the same. So if there weren't any women to begin with, you won't see any women. Or dark-skinned people, you won't see any, right? So the rethought, the process and what they're showing, and now if you look at the same results, you can see much more diversity, many different types of CEO that represent more fully the human range. And if you still want to see just male CEO, you can go to the subqueries and it's there, right? What happens when we're wrong? And we're always wrong. So it's very important to know that. Supporting efficient correction. In this case, if you insert any image into Office, you get what we call alt text. Alt text is a piece of text that helps the people who are blind or can see through the screen reader, and they help them to understand what's going on in that picture. And we sometimes get it wrong. This is the AI, right, that is creating this description. So there's an option to just go and change whatever it is in there. Or scoping services when in doubt, which means don't be too smart. If you don't know, just admit it, interact with the user. Google Photos asks, is that the same or is that a different person? Or Adobe Lightroom asking, hey, this is Amanda, we know that, but are the bottom images Amanda's too? Can you tell me? And then the last, but definitely not least, what happens over time? So encouraging granular feedback. This is so important. In the case that you see on the left, you can see that I got an email from Cortana saying, hey, you have this meeting coming up. Here is something that can help you prepare for that meeting. But just tell me, is that PowerPoint that I'm suggesting to you, is that relevant, related, not related? And I can react to that. I can give feedback. And the reason is that it's important. Actually, there are two reasons. One, we, as the creators of this product, we learn, right, from the user's interaction. And if it says no, it's not related, we have a piece of information right there. But on the other hand, once the user started interacting with the product, right, he is or she is investing their time in giving us this feedback. And there's a greater likelihood, if we know how to treat this feedback and communicate back to them what we're doing with it, etc., that they will come back because they're already invested. So granular feedback is good for everyone. And remembering recent interactions. This is also an interesting one. I looked for some information about the actor Johnny Depp, and I got all that information. And then I was curious, how old is he? And you can see he's 57 years old, right? But they didn't say who, right? Bing just remembered my last question and said, oh, Johnny Depp, you must have thought about him. Okay. So it gave me these results. Big question. When should I use guidelines in the product design process? And the answer is always. How do we do that though? First, it's a good practice to focus just on few guidelines. It's most likely that not every product will um, have all the guidelines related to it, right? Like there probably is some kind of core set that will be more important. And this is also, as a team activity, signals to everyone, hey, these are the things that we really care about, and these are the things that we are going to invest in, in resources, in time, in effort. Examples showing contextually relevant information is a guideline that is important when you are creating forms, right? I started typing, what's your gender? And then I get all these other auto options to choose from. And then making clear why the system did what it did is important for recommendation systems, right? Like if I see all these recommendations, if I don't understand them, then if the system is wrong, I will be much less forgiving uh, if I don't understand it, rather than saying, "Oh, okay, I don't agree with that, but I know why the system thought it might be relevant." And then when we are thinking about this, start brainstorming features on top of these guidelines. What are the guidelines that we ladder up and make sure that the AI product that we're designing are positive? And then try designing your worst. What is the worst design that you can do? What's the worst that could happen? Explore tensions both between conflicting guidelines and classical traditional UI design and AI design. And it's very important to make it tangible. Make that list of the features that ladder up to that guideline and track them in whatever DevOps system that you're using. And then measure the results. Use user research, use telemetry, and evaluate existing products. Don't forget them with the guidelines. What do you need to fix? How can you improve them? And what we do is we're doing these audits with the guidelines where we're starting by defining these core guidelines, and then we are, as a team, going through a sample scenario that we audit together, so everybody gets the sense of what do these responsible AI bugs may look like, and then actually file those bugs with a bug bash. So, and at the end, they just land into our Azure DevOps system as bugs, and they can be tracked and they can be fixed, and it's very transparent for everyone. So, why should we care? Because AI systems are different and we need specific guidelines for them. Because good design can mitigate issues and the guidelines try to help. Because you want to earn users' love and trust, and this is connected to the bottom line, right? And you can use the guidelines, you should use them throughout the process, and feel free to evangelize them with your teams, with other teams as well. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about all this. Here on this slide, you can see additional information on when you can see the guidelines, download them, and read the KAI paper. Thank you very much.